My name is Danielle Carter, 37 years old, living in Franklin, Tennessee. I work for a logistics company managing interstate supply chains. The job isn't glamorous, but I'm good at it, well respected, and financially independent. I used to think that was enough, until one afternoon in early March, when I discovered something worse than being forgotten, being deliberately erased from my own family. That Sunday, I was driving home after a site audit near the outskirts of Chattanooga. I took a shortcut through the old neighborhood where my parents lived, just intending to pass by. But as I turned onto Willow Creek Drive, I slammed the brakes. The familiar house was decorated with blue and white balloons, cars lined both sides of the street, a digitally printed banner stretched across the fence. My mother's legacy, Emily. Sleep, practice, Emily.love. The pillar of the Huxley family. Emily. My younger sister, not our parents, not the family, just her. I pulled into a neighbor's driveway and sat frozen behind the wheel. No text, no invite, not even a mention. And the worst part, I wasn't surprised. It all crumbled without a sound. I still remembered last year's Mother's Day. I sent a bouquet of white tulips, her favorite, along with a handwritten card, but in the family photo posted on Facebook that day, there was no trace of it. Or Christmas. I gifted Dad a state-of-the-art espresso machine. Not a word of thanks. Instead, Emily posted a story. Gift from Daddy's favorite girl. Enjoy your espresso, Dad. At the time, I brushed it off, told myself maybe they just forgot. But now it was obvious. They were building a perfect family narrative, and I wasn't in the picture. I drove off without turning off the engine, without glancing back. When I got home, I pulled out the old plastic storage box from under my bed, the one with things I hadn't had the heart to throw away, a 10th grade writing medal, a letter from Dad when I got my scholarship, a photo of my parents standing between Emily and me at our high school graduation. But what stopped me cold was the silver hair clip, engraved with a delicate my mother gave it to me on my 16th birthday, along with the words, "As long as you wear this, I'll always see you as strong." I used to believe that. Now, I wasn't so sure. I put everything back in the box, pushed it deep behind winter sweaters in the closet. Not because I forgot, but because I didn't yet know what to do with those fragments. That night, while reheating leftover butternut squash soup, my phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but for some reason my hand picked it up. "Miss Danielle Carter?" A deep, courteous male voice came through. "This is Richard Langston. I used to manage your family's legal documents. I apologize for the sudden call, but I need to confirm some details regarding the Huxley estate. Do you still have your copy of the trust agreement?" I frowned. "I never received anything." There was a pause. Then he continued slowly. "It was mailed to your address in Franklin, but a forwarding request was submitted under Emily Huxley's name." The room seemed to fall silent. I was gripping the phone so tightly my fingers had turned pale. "Would you be able to come to my office?" Richard went on. "There are a few things I believe you need to see with your own eyes." I agreed without thinking. After the call ended, I just stood there, spoon still in my hand, soup simmering softly, my mind completely blank, like someone had flipped a switch and cut the power. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had deliberately erased me. And the scariest part, I had started to get used to it without even realizing. The next morning, I went to Richard Langston's law office in downtown Franklin. It was an old red brick building with a brass nameplate and thick carpeted hallways like something out of a 90s movie. Strangely, despite having sat through hundreds of business meetings in my life, I had never felt my stomach tighten the way it did as I pressed the elevator button for the 3rd floor. Richard greeted me with a firm handshake, his seasoned eyes behind tortoise-shell glasses barely hiding a trace of sympathy. "Thank you for coming, Danielle," he said, motioning me into a small, private conference room with drawn curtains and an old oak table. On the table sat a thick folder, clipped inside a hard plastic binder. The front label read, "Huxley Family Trust, Amendments, and Original Copy." "I used to represent your parents when the trust was first established," he began, "up until about 3 years ago when I withdrew due to A few irregular changes. I frowned. What changes? He pushed the file toward me and opened to the first page. This is the most recent update. According to it, all assets, including 3 properties, shares in Huxley Logistics, and their retirement fund, were transferred to Emily Huxley as the sole heir and manager. I scanned the document. My name wasn't on it. Not as a co-owner, not as a successor, not anywhere. But this is what raised a red flag for me, he said, standing and walking to a locked filing cabinet behind his desk. A moment later, he returned with a thick envelope, carefully sealed with red wax. On the front, in elegant handwriting, it read, Danielle, keep sealed until necessary. I stared at it like it was some alien object. Your mother brought this in herself 2 years ago, Richard said slowly. According to her, it was a parallel file meant to preserve the original intentions of the Huxleys before any revisions. I called you immediately after the new documents were filed, but the mail was returned. It wasn't until later that I discovered your mailing address had been changed via digital form, signed by Emily. My chest tightened like a brick had been dropped onto it. I remembered last year, a couple of bank statements never made it to me on time. When I asked the post office, they said a temporary forwarding request had been filed for my address. I thought it was a system error. Now, I knew better. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized photocopy of the original trust document, dated nearly 4 years ago, around the time my father had just sold a lot in Clarksville, and my mother was recovering from knee surgery. My name appeared clearly under asset co-beneficiary, Danielle Carter, legally entitled to 50% of all holdings, including properties, the family business, and accrued retirement funds. My father's signature, my mother's, the notarization seal from Langston and Morris. Everything was there, dated and intact. Tucked inside was a sticky note, handwritten in a familiar hand. Richard, keep this for the girl if anything goes sideways. Tom Huxley. I stared at those words, feeling like my father had just whispered behind my shoulder. He had never been a man of many words, but when he wrote something down, it meant he wanted it to outlive him. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the folder's edge, my mind hollow. So that means they didn't just change their minds. They buried it? Richard nodded, his voice lowering. And unless that update was legally verified by you, it doesn't override the original. Not entirely. Unless I never found out, I said, still staring at the words 50%. There's one more thing. He pulled out another envelope, thinner this time. Under Tennessee law, anyone removed from a trust without proper notice has the right to petition for a temporary freeze on all asset transfers until the matter is resolved. I let out a short, dry laugh, not from humor, but because everything now felt like a family play, scripted years in advance, where I was the last blindfolded audience member. I want copies of all of this, I said, my voice steady as steel, both digital and hard copy. Richard nodded. I'll have them ready immediately. Driving home, I didn't turn on music. No radio, just the sound of wind brushing the windows and the steady drum of my own pulse. The update I never saw, the letter I never received, the address I never changed. Emily had planned it all. That evening, I sat at the dining table in my quiet apartment, my hand resting on the folder from Richard Langston's law office. I hadn't opened it again. Just knowing it existed was enough to tighten my throat. But the tightness wasn't from surprise. It was from realizing that everything I had once given freely was now being used by the people I loved most to erase me. I opened my laptop and pulled up an old spreadsheet I'd created years ago, a place where I'd logged family contributions just for fun. I used to treat it like a kind of financial journal, but the more I scrolled, the more it hurt. 2014, Dad lost his job. I wired them $12,000 to cover the mortgage and stop the foreclosure. He called it an advance, but never paid it back. 2016, the plumbing burst at Mom's house right before Thanksgiving. I was at a conference in Phoenix, but still called the repair service and covered the nearly $6,000 bill. 2018, Emily got pulled over for a DUI. I paid close to $7,000 to hire a lawyer and keep her from being charged. 2020, the pandemic hit the family business hard. I used my personal business credit card to front 3 months' wages for 6 of their employees. No interest, no contract, just to help the family weather the storm. And the most recent, 2022. Mom broke her hip, and her insurance wouldn't cover the extras. I bought her a brand new Toyota Corolla with senior accessibility features, thinking she'd feel safer driving herself to church. But then I saw her post a photo on Facebook with the caption, "Gift from Emily, my little angel." I didn't comment, didn't message. I thought maybe she just got confused. But now I knew it wasn't confusion. It was a choice. One by one, I had given away pieces of my life, believing that blood wouldn't betray me, believing that love didn't need receipts. But what I got in return was deliberate invisibility. I stood up, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old envelope labeled Supplemental Mortgage Documents. Inside was the original scanned document for the Willow Creek house, where my family still lived, with a section clearly stating the mortgage had been assisted and paid for 3 consecutive years by Danielle Carter. Dad once said something that stuck with me. "You're the one who knows how to calculate. Everything you do is worth every penny." Turns out he was right. They had calculated me, every penny, as an invisible investment toward one goal, writing me out of the picture. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old messages with Emily. The last one from her was in June of last year. "Hey sis, if you happen to have $2,500, could I borrow it? I'll pay you back after I close the Memphis deal." I transferred the money that night, no questions, never asked for it again. But now, looking back, I realized Emily never checked in on me unless she needed money. Every message began with, "Can you?" and ended in silence. I took a screenshot of the entire expense log and saved it under a new name. Debt of Loyalty 20142023. Not to demand repayment, but to remind myself I've done enough. More than enough. Just then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I heard you're digging into old files. You'd better stop. Some things shouldn't be unearthed." I stared at the screen. No name, no emoji, just one sentence, cold and clear like a threat. I copied the number and searched it on Google. Nothing. A burner phone. I leaned back in my chair, a strange feeling rising in my chest. Not hurt, not anger, but a cold clarity. Maybe this wasn't just about losing the inheritance that should have been mine. Maybe it was about being manipulated for over a decade, tricked into believing that love only had value when it came with no credit. But from now on, I would document everything. Every dollar, every receipt, every message. Not to reclaim the money, but to reclaim the truth. That night, I sat at my desk, the light from the window casting long shadows across the folder Richard had given me. Papers layered like a maze of ink and legal jargon. But between all the numbers, names, and dry official stamps, there was one thing that couldn't be hidden: my father's handwriting. Or rather, what was supposed to be. I had seen my father's signature hundreds of times. He always wrote quickly, but never sloppily. His handwriting slanted slightly to the right, and he always extended the tail of the "y" like a long thread. Whenever he signed Thomas R. Huxley, he emphasized the R. So clearly, people sometimes thought it was part of his last name. And yet, on the property transfer for the lake house in Henderson, the place we used to gather every Labor Day, the signature looked mechanical, soulless, unfamiliar. I checked the date, July 5th of last year. I closed my eyes, digging through memories, then opened my phone and scrolled through old photos. And there it was. Photo evidence, time-stamped and undeniable. Made a picture of my dad in his hospital bed at St. Mary's, IV in his arm, pale, eyes shut. That was the week he'd had a mild stroke and was admitted for nearly 7 days. I was the one who drove him there, stayed at his side. I remembered it clearly. During the first 3 days, he couldn't write a single word because his right hand was numb. So who signed that document? And who notarized it in that condition? I looked up, the notary ID listed at the bottom. Registered by notary TN 99,284. Jessica L. Brewer. Jessica Brewer. The name sliced through my memory like scissors through cloth. I didn't just know it. I'd met her. I opened Facebook and typed her name into the search bar. In seconds, my suspicion was confirmed. Jessica Brewer, Emily's college roommate. They were so close that Emily took her along on a trip to Mexico in 2012. I remembered the photo, both of them giggling on a sailboat holding cocktails. I wasn't invited. Emily said, "It's just for besties." I scrolled down further, listed occupation, mobile notary, Greater Nashville area. I printed the entire transfer document and notarization file. I also screenshotted the social media connection between Emily and Jessica. And as I organized the files, a strange feeling settled in. Not shock, not rage, but calm before a storm. A forged signature, a misleading date, a notary with a personal connection to the beneficiary. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a machine, a staged play. And I, the one who had helped cover nearly $100,000 in costs tied to these very properties, was the last audience member finally being handed the script. I took everything to a local print shop, scanned it into a hard drive, and created a new folder on my laptop. Lake House discrepancy, legal evidence. That night, I called someone I'd worked with on a community housing project, Eleanor Marks, a forensic handwriting analyst. "Danielle?" Her voice was just as sharp and clear as I remembered. "It's been a while." "I need a signature verified," I said without small talk, "and I need the result in legal language." There was a pause. "Is this family?" I exhaled, not sure it qualifies as that anymore. We scheduled a meeting for Tuesday afternoon. I would bring the original document along with samples of my dad's real signature, insurance forms, a car lease, even an old PTA permission slip he signed for me back in high school. I had kept them like mementos. Now they'd serve as evidence. As I closed the folder, a message popped up on my phone, this time from a landline number. "Danielle, don't torture yourself. Some things are better left buried." No name. But I knew who sent it. I put the phone down and stepped out onto the balcony. A light rain had begun to fall over Franklin, the droplets tapping against the railing in quiet rhythm. I wasn't trying to stir things up. I was pulling the truth out of the mud. Tuesday afternoon, I held the file with both hands like I was carrying a lifetime. Franklin was colder than usual, and the wind scattered dark red leaves across the cracked sidewalks. I arrived at Eleanor Marks's office exactly on time. Not a minute early, not a minute late. She opened the door, still petite, hair tied high, eyes sharp enough to see what others try to hide. "I kept my promise," she said, taking the folder, "and I brought something you'll want to see." I sat down, silent. Eleanor opened her laptop and pulled up a side-by-side comparison. One image showed the signature from the Lake House deed transfer, the other a verified signature from my father on a 2019 medical file. Beside them was a detailed analysis of pen strokes, slant angle, and pressure. "It's a mismatch," she said bluntly. "The slant is off by nearly 12 degrees, the ending strokes are abruptly cut. Whoever signed this tried to mimic the original, but didn't understand the natural wrist movement of the real writer." I gave a slight nod. I had already suspected, but hearing it confirmed by an expert made it real. It was no longer suspicion, it was evidence. "And this," Eleanor added, "will help you a lot. If you're preparing a legal objection, this is the first domino. I didn't reply immediately. I quietly slid the analysis into a black zipper folder, stood up, thanked her, and drove straight to my next destination. A place I hadn't visited in nearly 8 years, the office of retired attorney Walter Hammond. He had been a close friend of my grandfather and was the one who drafted the will for my grandfather's personal estate, separate from my parents' holdings. I remembered it clearly because on the day of the funeral, he showed up late, but stood beside me in the rain until the hearse drove away. When I walked in, he looked up over his thick glasses and smiled, tired but genuine. "Danielle Carter, you've grown up. And you still remember the past better than I'd hoped," I said with a small smile. After some light catching up, I laid out everything: the forged deed, the notary's ties to my sister, the threatening messages, and the legal proof that I was once a named beneficiary. He sat quietly for a moment, then turned to a bookshelf, pulled open a hidden compartment, and retrieved a thin file bound with old twine. He placed it in front of me. "Did you know your grandfather set up a supplementary trust for you?" he asked. I blinked. "I thought he left a joint will for the whole family." He shook his head. "Wrong. He created a separate trust for you when you were in college, but it wasn't made public. It was kept sealed and only activates if there's evidence you've been removed from the family estate through fraud or coercion." I froze. "In here," he said, tapping the pages, "is a special clause. If there is legal evidence of any forged or improper transfer involving joint family assets, the trust's beneficiary, you, has the right to petition for a full asset freeze until the matter is investigated." I opened the file and my heart skipped a beat when I saw the line, "Danielle Carter, sole beneficiary, under Conditional Clause 3B. Below that, my grandfather's signature, Elliot M. Carter, slanted, sweeping, and full of flair. Exactly how he signed the books in his personal library. And more importantly," Hammond continued, "this clause was never revoked. I checked 3 weeks ago after receiving an anonymous call from someone claiming to be a protector of shared interest." "Could be someone from my family," I murmured. "Maybe," he replied, "or maybe someone who just wants to see justice done." I stared at my name printed in the agreement. It wasn't joy I felt, it was relief. Like someone had believed in me long ago and quietly left a key for the day I'd find the final door locked. "So what's the next step?" I asked. "File an emergency motion to suspend any further transfers with the county court. I can help you prepare it, but you need to be certain you're ready for this fight." I nodded for the first time in weeks, without hesitation. I didn't come here to get the money back. I came to recover the truth they thought I'd never find. On Sunday morning, I got a text from my mother. The message was short, almost cold. "Brunch at the house at 11 a.m. Everyone will be there. Hope you'll come too." No emojis, no "love you" at the end like she used to. It felt more like a board meeting memo than a note to her daughter. It took me exactly 3 minutes to respond. "I'll be there." No questions, no feigned surprise. I knew they wanted to control the narrative and thought a light brunch might blur the cracks. But I wasn't the same Danielle from those old brunches. The one who used to sit quietly in the corner, picking at salad while everyone praised Emily like some small-town celebrity. When I arrived, the clock read 10:59. The front lawn was perfectly trimmed, the windows spotless, everything arranged like they were trying to prove something. But the one thing they forgot to tidy up was memory. And memory always finds its way back. The door opened. Emily appeared first. Pastel floral dress, perfectly matched lipstick, and a smile too rehearsed to be real. "You're here," she said, voice trying to sound warm. "I came because Mom invited me," I replied, walking in without looking back. In the dining room, my mother was laying out waffles, omelets, and blueberry preserves. My father sat in the corner chair, glanced at me, then returned to his newspaper. My mother turned around, arms spread like she had just blessed both her marriage and the tablecloth. "Danielle, you've lost weight. Sit down, I made the eggs you like." "I liked that dish in 9th grade," I said. "My taste has changed." The room missed a beat. We ate with only the clinks of forks and knives breaking the silence. Occasionally, Emily talked about her new project, a nonprofit helping young women find their direction. My mother nodded enthusiastically, occasionally patting her hand like she'd just won Miss Congeniality. My father remained silent, occasionally sipping his coffee. No one asked what I'd been doing. No one asked why I'd disappeared for 2 months. And, of course, no one mentioned the Henderson Lake House or the meeting with Attorney Hammond. As everyone moved on to dessert, I set my glass of orange juice down and stood. "I'm going to the restroom," I said calmly. But instead of walking down the hall, I turned toward the file cabinet by the stairs. This house hadn't changed much, right down to the hand towels still in the second drawer from the left. From my bag, I pulled out a folder I had prepared, the handwriting analysis from Eleanor, the trust agreement from Mr. Hammond, and a sealed envelope labeled Temporary Asset Freeze Notice, filed with Franklin County Court. I returned to the dining room and placed them right between the raspberry tart and the orange blossom honey jar. Emily raised an eyebrow. My mother froze. My father looked up for the first time all morning. "What is this?" my mother asked, voice hoarse. I sat back down, eyes steady. "It's my place in the family, the one you all thought you could erase." "Danielle, what are you talking about?" my father asked, a flicker of that old authority in his tone. "I'm talking about the forged deed someone had you sign while you were still in the hospital," I said. "About a notary who just happens to be Emily's best friend. And about Grandpa? The man who didn't let the truth die with him?" Emily flushed bright red. "You think you're doing what, stirring up trouble for a payday?" I gave a dry smile. "I'm not stirring anything. I'm just bringing it into the light." My mother reached for the documents, but I gently placed my hand over them. "The originals have already been filed with the court. These are just copies for your reading pleasure." No one said a word. Only the tick-tock of the wall clock filled the silence, like a countdown to something irreversible. I stood, took back the file, and headed for the door. As my hand touched the knob, I turned one last time. I used to believe being kind was enough to earn my place in this family. But now I know if I don't claim it myself, I'll always be left out. Williamson County Courthouse, Franklin, Tennessee. It was an overcast morning in early April, the kind of sky that felt like the whole city was holding its breath with me. I wore a white blouse and a light gray blazer. Not flashy, but crisp down to the cuffs. Inside my bag was a file over 300 pages thick, neatly tabbed. Forged signature, notary conflict of interest, breach of trust clause. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my attorney, Monica Drayton, a woman in her early 40s with eyes sharp enough to slice through excuses. She used to be a prosecutor, and I knew I couldn't have asked for someone who understood this system better. Across from us sat Emily, flanked by my mother and their attorney, a silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit who was already starting to show signs of strain. My father wasn't there. My mother said he wasn't well enough. I knew it wasn't his health, it was his courage. When the judge entered, the room stood in silence. The clerk read a brief summary of the case, and then Monica stood to begin. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and resonant, "today we present verified evidence that my client, Miss Danielle Carter, was unlawfully removed from her rightful inheritance of the family estate. This includes notarized documents containing a forged signature, audio recordings detailing efforts to conceal trust documentation, and a notary with a personal relationship to the primary beneficiary." She reached into her folder and placed a small recording device on the wooden table. "We'd like to play a conversation legally obtained at the residence of Mrs. Linda Huxley between her and her daughter, Emily, on January 12th of this year." The courtroom fell silent as the audio played. "Do you think she'll find out?" Emily's voice. "I had Jessica handle the notary part. Danielle's always too busy. She won't check." My mother's voice. "As long as my name's on it, we're fine. She never reacts fast enough anyway." Emily. I had listened to that clip so many times, but hearing it in court felt like a gunshot. My mother's face turned pale. Emily froze. Their attorney tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Has the recording been authenticated?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Monica replied, handing over additional documents. The identities and legal recording process were verified by an independent third party. She continued by presenting the handwriting analysis from expert Eleanor Marks. This report confirms that the signature on the Henderson Lake House transfer documents does not match the handwriting of Mr. Thomas Huxley, who was hospitalized at the time. The judge leaned in, studying side-by-side comparisons enlarged on the display board. "Do we have evidence of a special clause in the trust?" he asked. Monica nodded, pulling out an authenticated copy from attorney Walter Hammond. Clause 3B in the trust established by Mr. Elliot Carter states, if fraud or forgery is found in any transfer of shared assets, all relevant property is to be frozen pending investigation, and temporary control shall revert to the designated beneficiary, Miss Daniel Carter. Emily gripped the arms of her chair. My mother started to rise, but her lawyer gently pulled her back down. The judge sat back, glanced through the documents one more time, and then lowered his gavel. Based on the evidence presented, this court rules. Effective immediately, all assets related to the Huxley estate, including real property, bank accounts, and company shares, are to be frozen pending further investigation. A criminal inquiry into document forgery and notary abuse is to be initiated. Temporary asset management is hereby granted to the plaintiff, Danielle Carter, until a final ruling is issued. I heard every word, but my heart still pounded like it was trying to escape my chest. Not because I had won, but because justice had finally spoken. Late, but not silent. Emily turned toward me, panic rising in her eyes. "You're going to tear this whole family apart over an old house?" I stood, collecting my documents, eyes steady. "No! I'm just refusing to live in a family built on lies." I walked out of that courtroom without a single word more. But my steps didn't shake this time. Because today I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was standing for everyone who's ever been pushed away from the table, just because they didn't nod at the right time. Late that afternoon, I returned to my grandfather's old house in the suburbs of Spring Hill. It had sat empty since he passed away. Though it was now legally in my name after the trial, this was the first time I opened the oak door using the very key he gave me when I was 16. Back then, he had simply said, "Women Day, this place will need someone who can keep things steady, even in silence." The house still breathed the same air, the scent of pine wood, the faint trace of printer ink from his office, and late sunlight slicing through the attic window. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't polished, but it was real. I stepped in, slipped off my shoes, and set my bag by the doorway. Memories rushed in like an early summer wind. Me sitting cross-legged on the floor, folding paper cranes with him. Every finished one earned me a peppermint candy. He was gone now, but the house, and what he believed in, remained. I spent the next 3 days cleaning every room. No hired help, no friends. Every layer of dust I wiped away felt like healing an old bruise. I took down the framed photos on the wall and replaced them with pictures I had taken in Arizona, Colorado, and Maine, places I'd gone alone, places no one in my family had ever asked about. On the top shelf of his bookcase, hidden behind a row of hardcover classics, I found a small wooden box. Inside was a yellowed envelope, sealed, labeled. To Danielle. Open only when you need to know why. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. His handwriting hadn't changed. Bold, slightly slanted right with strong underlines. Danielle, if you're reading this, it means you've had to face what I always feared you might, betrayal by the people closest to you. I know you won't run. You're the one who steps back to observe, but when you move forward, no one can stop you. I left you this house not because it's big, but because it's a place you can start over, without needing anyone's permission, not to hide, to live the way you choose. Don't seek revenge. They are not worth living your life in anger. Live well, so that every time they remember you, they have to swallow their regret in silence. Your grandfather, Elliot M. Carter. I framed the letter and hung it above the desk. Next to it was a map of the United States, pinned with all the places I had traveled. I added one more pin. Red for Spring Hill. For the first time in years, I wasn't just passing through. I had arrived. The following week, I filed paperwork to start a nonprofit called the 50% Project. Its mission, to support people, especially women, who were unfairly cut out of inheritance, often because they were too quiet or too compliant. I used part of the reclaimed estate to hire attorneys, financial experts, and mental health counselors to guide others like me. One Saturday morning, I received a handwritten letter from my mother. It wasn't thick, it wasn't long. Danielle, I don't know where to begin. There are nights I wake up wishing you were still at the dinner table. I was wrong, but I was also afraid. I understand if you don't want to hear more, but if you ever do, I'll be here. I didn't reply. I folded the letter and placed it in a locked drawer. Not because I forgave her, but because I wasn't ready to be hurt again. That evening, I sat barefoot on the back porch, warm wood under my feet. Sparrows perched on the old fence, swaying in the breeze. I took a long breath. No one was there to tell me, don't make a scene, don't be selfish, or you're the older one. No more silent stares when I spoke the truth. No more dinner tables with a seat set for me. Yet no one remembered to call my name. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't storm off to prove a point. I simply chose to live, and this time to live with my self-respect intact. Some battles don't have to be won loudly. Sometimes just surviving without losing who you are is victory enough. From someone cast out of her own family's inheritance, Danielle turned pain into power. She didn't seek revenge with noise, but with calm, the law, and unwavering resolve. Her story proves that freedom doesn't always come from others' approval. It comes from standing up for your worth. Not everyone who stays silent is weak. Some are just preparing to speak in a way the whole world can't ignore. What do you think of Danielle's choice? In an unfair family, is silence or confrontation the right path? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.